Now, inside on pages 4 and 5 is, look at that, someone taking a selfie with the Russian rebel leader Yevgeny Prigozhin while he was on his way to the Kremlin this weekend. Now, Sophie, he didn't quite make it there. He stopped halfway. So what happened to his great scheme to storm Moscow and change the head of the armed forces because of the catastrophe in Ukraine?
So, yeah, Russia has dominated the news this weekend. So just a bit of context. So Prigozhin, he's the head of the Wagner group, which is basically a mercenary group. So like a private army that's essentially been hired by the Russian army to help fight in Ukraine. And now his leader this weekend started kind of throwing around accusations at the defense minister and at Putin, saying that they hadn't been adequately equipped during the war in Ukraine, but also that essentially Russia and the Kremlin had sent a missile at the base camp, the Wagner base camp, which is located in the Donbass region, which is in Ukraine, occupied by Russian soldiers at the moment. So there's some kind of infighting. There are accusations of a civil war maybe going to be going on. And the Wagner group started making their way through Rostov in Russia. So just on the border of Ukraine, they crossed the border back into Russia on their way into Moscow. But as Susie mentioned, they stopped just before the Putin up there. He did a broadcast basically saying that it had been a stab in the back, that there was a mutiny, all of this. So we're seeing the kind of cracks in Putin's leadership here. And then, so that sort of happened as we were going into the weekend. And then last night, we end up getting this sort of like U-turn situation where basically it turns out that Prigozhin has then gone to Belarus and is now essentially in exile. I'm sure he's very much looking over his shoulder, but he's made some sort of deal with Lukashenko, the Belarusian president. So he's gone over there now. And it seems to be all tied up. But clearly, this is sort of the biggest threat to Putin's leadership that we have seen throughout his entirety as head of Russia. So a very dramatic sort of confusion for everyone.
It's been it was a weekend, one of those weekends where you sort of tend to have the rolling news on in the background and going, has he gone yet? Has he gone yet? Has he gone yet? A bit like OJ's very slow motion ride around LA. I'm trying to see Prigozhin, how far he got up the M4 towards Moscow. Now, so he got stopped halfway, partly because he didn't have nearly enough kit or troops. Russia military did actually bomb sort of an oil depot and that were on their way, on their path, that kind of stopped them a little bit. Partly because Putin paid him off. Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, negotiated a deal. He's offered Prigozhin safe harbour. Putin has agreed that no one will be prosecuted, including the troops, for taking part in the insurrection, in this great betrayal. So he's had to back down. And overnight, Sergei Shoigu, who is sorry to throw these Russian names at you, everybody, but we've learnt them and we're going to use them. Sergei Shoigu, who is the defense minister, who is the guy who allegedly ordered that missile attack on the Wagner group and is the one that Prigozhin here was rushing off to Moscow to deal with. He's been seen out sort of reviewing troops, so he's plainly not going anywhere either. But the question that's being worked out now really is whether this was a planned coup, Sophie, part of a major rebellion where there was other people involved, and it just fell apart, or if this guy, as I suspect, just flipped his lid and acted on the spur of the moment, really, and happened to get lucky.
Well, yeah, it's really hard to say. We're obviously talking about this missile. There have been reports that there hasn't been much evidence that a missile has actually gone to this base camp. So as you say, whether this is planned and actually, we've got Prigozhin there and the Wagner group are made up lots of ex-convicts, it's not regulated like the army in any way. Actually, at the start before Ukraine,
Con Air. The Wagner group is Con Air, everybody. Imagine the worst people in the world on a plane with some guns. That's what you've got.
And we've seen that throughout the war in Ukraine as well. We've had people from the Wagner group admitting sort of killing children and pensioners and women. So it's hard to say. Prigozhin has basically said he's lost lots of men out in Russia. He's very angry about this. So it's in the background, this has kind of been petering up for a long time. And clearly a switch kind of flicked, be it there be a missile or not, something's obviously led him to think, I need to take action. Now, it shows us we see Putin, the whole thing that we've always got is that he's got clear support in Russia on the special military operation, as they call it, in Ukraine. But clearly his support has got cracks in it, which we saw in a very, very kind of clear and obvious way this weekend.
Exactly. Prigozhin's got, tell us what you think, everybody. Do you think this was actually planned? Do you think it was just a cock-up? What do you think went wrong here? Because Prigozhin has had contacts with the inside of Putin's regime. He knows everyone around Putin. He was one of those people until he became this sort of head of this mercenary group. There is no way, I think, that he would have driven on up to Moscow unless he thought someone there was going to open the door for him. So he must have felt that there was some kind of support for him getting there, or that the support would appear once he got there. So it indicates that people who know that regime inside out know that the regime itself is rocky, and that support is not permanent. And the thing that matters next is what happens to Putin, isn't it? Because he's been fatally weakened by this. He's tried to regain authority by sort of parading these images of Sergei Shoigu around. And they're clearly making out he's not going anywhere. But his authority, his ability to survive and withstand an attack from within has got to be under serious question. I mean, Mike says Gorbachev survived a coup attempt in 1991, but he wasn't in power for very long after that. It does indicate that someone is very, very weak. So how long do you think Putin's got?
Oh, gosh, what a question. It's hard to, we could talk about this being the beginning of the end, but, many people have been reporting on Russia and the situation there for a long time, have said, the invasion in the first place was the beginning of the end of Putin. It's just a matter of time. Clearly, this has sped up the process hugely. But what we're going to see from this may not necessarily be the end of the war. It may not necessarily be a positive thing. Prigozhin, the coup has essentially happened because they're so passionate about the war in Ukraine. They want it to be going more successfully. What happens if you've got this head of this big ex-convict group, Wagner, who's, previously worked in troll farms to interfere with US elections and whatnot? Him at the head of the state, in charge of Russia's nuclear capability. Are we essentially seeing a better outcome there with losing Putin? We don't know. But, yeah.
Devil you know, isn't it? But it does seem likely that Putin has got a finite amount of time left. In Russia, leaders generally don't tend to survive. They generally tend to die with their boots on. And it's got to be said that Putin's enemies tend to die on the wrong side of a window pretty quickly. And of course, if Prigozhin's in Belarus and is no longer friendly with the regime, what's happening to the war in Ukraine? Because it was his forces that helped take Bakhmut. And Zelensky, if he's had any sense over the weekend, has been driving very, very fast south and east and taking as much land as he can while they're busy doing something else. We'll see. I give it 6 months. Come back and check on me by Christmas, and we'll see if Putin or Zelensky are still where they are now.